Hi and welcome to Fun Swedish. The International Women's Day, den internationella Kvinnodagen, is here. And because of that, we will highlight some important women in Swedish history. Some might be well known for you, and some might not. But hopefully, this will be a great opportunity to learn more Swedish and to learn more about Swedish history so that you can impress a Swede. But before we talk about famous Swedish women, let's talk about the Swedish word for woman, kvinna. It sounds a bit like the word queen, so that can help to remember the word. So again, en kvinna, a woman, and in plural we say kvinnor. Nevertheless, we also have some other words, such as dam, tjej, flicka. Let's talk a bit about their differences. Dam, with a long Swedish a, is our word for lady. Here, pronunciation is super important.
Congratulations, son. This is terrible. I didn't understand a word of what he said.
Don't say dam, because that can mean both pond or dust, but not lady. So remember, if you want to say lady, dam. And then we have the word tjej. That is kind of the word we use for girl. Even if it's used a lot nowadays, it's actually a borrowed word from another language, Romani. The original Swedish word for girl is actually flicka. However, nowadays we use more flicka if we're talking about younger girls, like kids. And then there are of course more words that you can use, but these are the most important ones. Now back to svensk kvinnohistoria. Some important events for the women's rights movement here in Sweden, which, by the way, are called in Swedish kvinnors rättigheter. They say that Sweden might have been one of the first countries in the world to implement the right to vote for women, already in 1718. However, it didn't last for long, and it was abolished again in 1722. Then it wasn't until 1919 that all Swedish women were allowed to vote again. And in the election of 1921, they used this right, and have ever since. And all this happened thanks to the organization Landsföreningen för kvinnans politiska rösträtt, who collected more than 350,000 signatures for this cause. And they managed this by traveling around the whole country, educating the Swedes about the importance of civil and political rights for everyone. Alla. In this picture, you can see one of their leaders, the journalist and author Elin Wägner, who made it possible. And she is seen as a very important figure in Swedish history. Another important event happened in 1955, when it became law that all women with a profession would get paid parental leave during 3 months. And nowadays, we actually have 480 days per child. So things have got even better since 1955.
See, things are looking up already.
Another important event took place this same year. Sexual education became mandatory in all Swedish schools. And this leads us to our next important woman in Swedish history, Elise Ottesen-Jensen, who founded the organization RFSU in 1933. Elise Ottesen-Jensen was actually born in Norway, but lived in Sweden for most of her life. She was our first sexual educator and a women's rights activist. Apparently it started when her little sister Magnhild gave birth to a child at 16 years old. Since Magne wasn't married, during this time, she was forced to give away her child for adoption, and she developed severe mental issues due to this, and she ended up in a mental institution where she died years later. Elise saw how much her little sister had suffered, so in order to protect other girls from the same experience, she started a campaign for sexual education and birth control. And she said this famous Swedish quote: "Jag drömmer om den dag då alla barn som föds är välkomna, alla män och kvinnor är jämlika och sexualiteten ett uttryck för innerlighet, ömhet och njutning." And Elise later founded the famous Swedish organization RFSU, Riksförbundet för sexuell upplysning, or in English, the Swedish Association for Sexuality Education. And this organization, RFSU, have contributed to many important changes in Swedish history. If you want to learn more about important events for women's rights and gender equality, then you can check out this list from Jämställdhetsmyndigheten. Oh yeah, that was a long word. That's how we call the Swedish Gender Equality Agency. Other famous Swedish women that are not with us any longer, but still remember for what they accomplished, are Astrid Lindgren, en författare, a Swedish author famous for her children's books, such as Pippi Långstrump and Emil i Lönneberga, and many other books. If you want to learn more about her life, then I can really recommend this Swedish series called Unga Astrid. And if you're into reading, I would really recommend you to read her books if you want to learn more Swedish. Another Astrid, perhaps less famous, but still important, is Astrid Kinstrand, the first Swedish woman that read the news on the radio. She got many threats for doing this, but she was brave enough, modig, to continue. And she was a great inspiration for many women. And being a female YouTuber, I feel very happy that I'm allowed nowadays to talk in public thanks to people like her. Moving on, we also need to mention the Swedish actresses Greta Garbo and Ingrid Bergman, both very talented Swedish movie stars who made it in Hollywood. And if you want to know more about important women in Swedish history, then you should check out this webpage and Instagram account, PatternMeBright. It's made by my childhood friend Gina Eriksson, who portrays women, many of them Swedish, and their accomplishments in patterns. This scarf I'm wearing was actually made by her, and it represents Sally Bauer, the first Scandinavian woman to swim over the English Channel. And I also have this other scarf that represents the Polish scientist Marie Curie. It's said that she took in so much radiation that her fingerprints were visible in her lab books. So if you want some Swedish design with a great message, then I really recommend you to check out Gina Eriksson's things. Moving on, what about famous Swedish women nowadays? I guess history is still being written, but I will say that these would absolutely make the list. Greta Thunberg. Yes, that's how we say her name in Swedish. I guess most of you know about her.
How dare you!
Famous for her environmental activism and for Fridays for Future. Greta was born and raised in Sweden, and she's actually the daughter of another famous Swedish woman, Malena Ehrman, an opera singer who competed in Eurovision. And talking about singers, another very famous Swedish woman is Zara Larsson. Not only famous for her music, but also for her activism promoting women's rights and sexual health awareness. Greta and Zara Larsson are quite famous Swedish women internationally. We have another one, perhaps less famous, but very impressive, and that is Magda Gad, a journalist and a war correspondent. And she got internationally famous. And we also have another Magda to mention, Magdalena Andersson, our first female prime minister. And it doesn't matter if you agree or disagree with her politics, she will definitely have a place in history books due to this. And there are, of course, so many more important women in Sweden nowadays.
Too many to count. How many?
In 2022, the Swedish newspaper Expressen published a list of the 100 most important Swedish women in 2022. You can find it here if you want to check it out. Maybe, hopefully, someday I will make that list. I'm sure your likes and nice vibes will help me get there someday. Hej då!